Nikoloz Tskitishvili, born April 14, 1983. The 2002 NBA draft is remembered as one of the strangest in league history. It wasn't the most talented draft class, but it was filled with bold gambles, teams chasing upside, and franchises desperate to uncover the next hidden gem. At the center of it was a 7-foot teenager from Tbilisi, Georgia named Nikoloz Tskitishvili, whose name shocked fans when David Stern announced him as the 5th overall pick in 2002. To some, he was completely unknown. His resume barely included playing time overseas, and yet he was selected ahead of proven talents like Amari Stoudemire and Caron Butler. At that moment, he became the NBA's mystery man, drafted almost entirely on the idea of what he could be rather than what he was. The pick was less about Tskitishvili himself and more about timing. The league was still reeling from Dirk Nowitzki's meteoric rise into superstardom, and front offices began scouring Europe for the next 7-footer who could shoot from outside and handle the ball like a guard. Tskitishvili fit the mold on paper, tall, fluid, and with a jump shot that looked smooth in practice settings. He was hyped as a unicorn before the league was even ready for that style, a prototype of what every general manager now covets. The problem was, almost none of it translated in real games. He had only appeared in a handful of contests for Benetton Treviso in Italy, rarely leaving the bench, but somehow convinced scouts he was a top 5 pick. Once in the NBA, the hype unraveled fast. Thrown into the fire as a raw 19-year-old, he struggled to score, defend, or even stay on the court. His confidence, built on projections and workouts, evaporated in live competition. In just a few seasons, he went from the promise of being the next Dirk Nowitzki to one of the most infamous busts in draft history. Tskitishvili's name has since become shorthand for what happens when potential is overvalued and opportunity arrives before preparation. But what really went wrong for the player once sold as Europe's next great star? How did the NBA's obsession with upside transform him into one of the biggest what-ifs? For Nikoloz Tskitishvili, the story is a harsh reminder of how fragile growth can be when built more on hope than reality. What happened? Let's talk about it. Salute to Rocco Locasso on IG for this request. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth. Let's get it, man. Take a minute to like, subscribe, and comment on who I should do next. Nikoloz Tskitishvili is a 7-footer from Tbilisi, Georgia, who became one of the NBA's earliest experiments in drafting raw international prospects. Growing up in the post-Soviet era, he developed a passion for basketball and eventually earned a spot with Benetton Treviso in Italy, one of Europe's top clubs. But despite the resume, his actual court experience was thin. He appeared in only 14 games, often logging minimal minutes. Still, scouts became enamored with his size, smooth-looking jump shot, and flashes in workouts. At just 19 years old, he looked like the kind of versatile forward every team wanted after Dirk Nowitzki's rapid rise. When the 2002 draft arrived, Denver took the gamble, selecting him 5th overall. It was a shocking pick at the time, as he went ahead of American amateur stars and future NBA All-Stars. Expectations for him to become the next Dirk Nowitzki immediately outpaced reality. Stunt number 1, drafted too high off hype. The story of Nikoloz Tskitishvili's downfall begins with where he was drafted. Going 5th overall in the 2002 NBA draft instantly set expectations far beyond what he was ready to handle. Most top 5 picks are expected to step in right away and at least show glimpses of star potential. The problem with Tskitishvili was that he almost had no resume to justify the selection. His time in Italy was spent mostly on the bench, where he played just a handful of games and barely scored. Yet somehow, through pre-draft workouts and the hope of unearthing another Dirk Nowitzki, Denver convinced themselves that they had discovered the next European unicorn. In reality, what the Nuggets bought into was more myth than substance. Scouts raved about his size and shooting stroke, but those flashes came mostly in empty gyms, not under the lights of real competition. Unlike Amari Stoudemire, who was taken immediately after him and brought a strong body and natural explosiveness, Tskitishvili entered the league unproven and painfully raw. Drafting him 5th was less about what he could do and more about what teams imagine he might someday become. That gamble came with an enormous burden for a teenager who hadn't shown enough to dominate even at the European level. Being drafted so high magnified every flaw. Each missed shot and turnover reminded fans and media that the Nuggets passed on multiple future All-Stars for a player who was a complete unknown. It was a setup almost destined to fail because the higher your pick, the less patient teams and fans have for your development. For Tskitishvili, the hype-driven selection created a standard he could never realistically reach, planting the seeds for his career to unravel before it even had a chance to begin. Stunt number 2, no real NBA skill set. Once Tskitishvili reached the NBA, it didn't take long for the cracks to show. What looked good in theory, his size, mobility, and smooth jumper, fell apart when the game sped up and physicality increased. He was caught in between positions, too thin and weak to guard power forwards, yet too slow laterally to keep up with small forwards. The so-called versatility Denver banked on never actually existed once the ball went up. His shooting, the skill that supposedly separated him, never translated. While he had a nice release in practice, in real games, he struggled with confidence and rushed mechanics. Across 4 NBA seasons, he shot a dreadful 30% from the field and just 23% from 3. For a 7-footer billed as a shooter, those numbers told the whole story. He couldn't score efficiently and didn't have the handle or creativity to make plays when his shot wasn't falling. Defensively, he offered even less. Despite his height, he wasn't a rim protector and lacked the toughness to rebound in traffic. Coaches quickly realized he didn't impact the game on either end. If his jumper wasn't falling, and it rarely was, there was no reason to keep him on the floor. This led to inconsistent minutes, which only further wrecked his rhythm and confidence, creating a cycle that made it nearly impossible to improve. The NBA is unforgiving to players who don't bring at least one bankable skill to the table. With Tskitishvili, there wasn't a single area where he provided consistent value. He wasn't a shooter, wasn't a defender, and wasn't a rebounder. He was simply a theoretical player whose tools never sharpened into usable skills. By the time the Nuggets moved on from him, it was clear the gap between projection and production was too wide to ever close. Stunt number 3, confidence shattered early. For many young players, early struggles are just part of the adjustment period. But for Nikoloz Tskitishvili, being drafted so high meant he had no room to develop quietly. Every mistake was magnified, every poor shooting night another reminder that Denver passed on proven stars for him. That kind of spotlight is heavy for a 19-year-old who had barely played meaningful minutes before entering the NBA. As his weaknesses piled up, his confidence eroded quickly, and once that happened, his career never truly recovered. The Nuggets gave up on him within 2.5 seasons, and by then, the bust label had already stuck. He bounced from Golden State to Phoenix to Minnesota, but every stop was shorter and less impactful than the last. By the time he was 23, his NBA career was essentially over. Unlike other young players who are allowed to grow through mistakes, Tskitishvili was written off as a failed experiment before his prime even began. Mentally, he carried the weight everywhere he went. Overseas, he had a long career across Europe and Asia, but the shadow of being a top 5 NBA pick followed him. Confidence, once shaken at the highest level, is nearly impossible to rebuild in full. Instead of playing freely, he became tentative, unsure, and ultimately a shell of the player scouts once imagined. He still made a living in the sport, but the joy of playing basketball seemed stripped away by years of doubt and disappointment. The NBA can be a brutal environment when expectations and reality collide. Tskitishvili entered as a projected star, but once that projection collapsed, the pressure overwhelmed him. For a player whose game was already fragile, losing confidence so early was the final blow. His story reflects how quickly a young talent can unravel when development is rushed and patience runs out too soon. All in all, Nikoloz Tskitishvili's story is less about him personally and more about the environment that created his downfall. Drafted 5th overall with virtually no resume, he was a product of the NBA's desperation to uncover another Dirk Nowitzki. Instead of being allowed to grow at a steady pace overseas, he was thrown into the fire of American basketball with unrealistic expectations and no clear role. By the time his flaws were exposed, it was too late. The bust label had already defined him. Though his NBA career ended quickly, he went on to enjoy a long run overseas, proving he still had value as a professional player. Yet his name remains tied to one of the league's worst draft decisions. Tskitishvili will forever symbolize how hype can derail growth before it truly begins and how fragile an NBA career can really be when patience is absent. Salute, much respect, but for these reasons, his growth was stunted. It's your boy JC, Stunted Growth, and I'm out.